Good morning, my friends. It's me, Rain. Today I'm going to be making some Camembert cheese. Yum! The last time I made these cheeses, they were a great success, and I'm hoping for the same thing this time. I'm going to take you through the process with me. Well, not the entire process, because I'm going to be working on that pretty much all day today, and then it's got to sit overnight, and tomorrow I have to salt it and put it into the ripening containers where it's going to sit and bloom its beautiful mold for the next 2.5 months. And I'm hoping it'll be ready for New Year's Eve. So won't you join me? So here is the equipment you're going to need for making 2 wheels of Camembert. You need a big pot that's going to basically hold at least 6 liters, a gallon and a half. This container I bought at the dollar store. This is where my cheese is going to ripen. These are bamboo mats, and I've got some plastic mats, and I'll show you what I'm doing with those later. I've got a slotted spoon. This is just a dollar store icing knife that I'm going to use to cut the curds, because it needs to be able to go really far down. A regular knife isn't going to cut it, because you have to go down to the bottom of the pot. And I've got a ladle, my 2 Camembert molds, which are hollow, my digital thermometer, and for the ingredients I need 4 liters of whole milk, that's a gallon, a cup of heavy cream, I use whipping cream, cheese salt for later, some filtered water, about a half a cup. You need your coagulant, and in my case I have a double strength rennet. You need some calcium chloride when you're using store-bought milk, because the store-bought milk has been pasteurized and the calcium chloride helps restore what has been taken out during pasteurization. Every time you make cheese with store-bought milk, you need calcium chloride, except for mozzarella, but that's the only exception. And my bacterias. I've got Flora danica, Penicillium candidum, that's what makes the bloomy white. And I've got, this one I have a hard time pronouncing, Geotrichum candidum. So these are the 3 bacteria you need to make a bloomy white Camembert. So off we go. Let's make some cheese. So the first step in the cheese making process is to mix your milk and your cream together and heat it up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. I did that on the stove, just right on the stove. Some people use a double boiler, I don't. And as you can see, my temperature is at 91. I've found in my cheese making that if you're off by a degree or 2, it's really not a big deal. So I put my pot in the sink right now, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is add my bacteria. So according to the recipe that I have, that I actually found on a cheese making forum, it was somebody's recipe that they tweaked from a book or something like that, but it worked for me. I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon of the Flora danica bacteria, the Penicillium candidum bacteria, which is difficult to open. Give me a second. There we go. All these bacteria have to stay in the freezer, by the way, and they're good for a long time. So the Penicillium candidum bacteria, I put an 1/18 of a teaspoon, which is half of an eighth, right? And you just sprinkle them on. And the Geotrichum, which I'm going to just call Geo from now on. The Geo, you just add a pinch. So I'm going to use this much as a pinch. Now basically you just let that sit for 5 minutes. While the bacteria dissolves. I just wanted to add at this point that the reason I put my pot in the sink is because I put hot water in the sink, as you can see. And by doing this, it keeps the milk mixture pretty much at a constant temperature. My cheese temperature, or my milk temperature at this point, is at 93 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's going to regulate itself. I'm not even worried about that. Now I'm stirring it for 2 minutes, very gently. This up and down motion, this up and down stir, is actually called a cheesemaker's stir. It helps to really mix everything together and get all the bacteria dissolved and completely mixed into the milk, or so I have read. That's why one of the pieces of equipment you need is a slotted spoon to help you do the cheesemaker's stir. The initial investment for making cheese is, I guess, kind of high. You need to have, you know, a good pot that's going to hold sometimes up to 10 liters of milk, which is, I think, 2.5 gallons. Depending on what recipe you use, you need good recipes. I do not recommend getting recipes online unless you've, you know, spoken to the person and they've been tested. For example, on the cheese making forum that I belong to, I had in-depth discussion with the guy who came up with this Camembert recipe, and it works. Just taking recipes off the internet, like some of those cheese making companies I will not mention that I do not like anymore, New England, all of them failed for me, all of them. I do think that it perhaps had to do with the bacteria that I had that was not good, the ingredients or whatever. I changed companies and I've had successes since then. So my 2 minutes is up. I'm going to cover my milk, and it has to ripen for 90 minutes at about or around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So once in a while I'm going to come in and I'm going to check my temperature. If it goes down a little bit, I'll just add a little more hot water to the sink and just keep it going. But you'd be surprised at how long this mixture will retain its heat. The first 90-minute ripening is about 5 minutes from being done. So I'm going to prepare my coagulant, which is my double-strength rennet, and my calcium chloride. So the calcium chloride, I need 1/8 teaspoon. And I've already put a 1/4 cup of cool filtered water in each of these dishes. So just so I don't confuse myself, I'm keeping my bottles right next to the dishes, because once they're mixed up, they're impossible to tell which one is which. And the rennet also, I need 1/8 teaspoon. Keep in mind, this is double strength rennet. I made the mistake previously of forgetting that it's double strength rennet. Sometimes you can buy regular strength rennet, but this is double strength, and I made that mistake once of forgetting about that, and I doubled up the rennet thinking it was regular strength, and oh my gosh, was it sour. Ugh, it was awful. It's like, you know, those cartoons in the old days when they would drink alum or eat alum and then their mouths would get all hollow. That's kind of how it was. I don't recommend you use the rennet tablets, only because they're very hard to measure. And there's also something called junk rennet. I don't even know what that is, but I'm not recommending it because I have read everywhere that it's really not very good. So my calcium chloride is ready, my rennet is ready, and the 90-minute ripening period will be done in 2 minutes. The 90 minutes is up for the first ripening. Doesn't really look very different, but all of that wonderful bacteria is now mixed in and doing wonders without us being able to see it. And as you can see, my temperature is at 91. Throughout the last 90 minutes, I had to add a little bit of hot water because it dipped down to 86 and then 88, but I kept it pretty much around 90. So now I'm going to add my diluted calcium chloride to the mix. And I have to stir this for 2 minutes, stirring very gently for 2 minutes. Now I'm going to add my rennet, my diluted rennet mix. Again, stirring very gently, but this time for only 1 minute. From what I've read, you should not stir your rennet for more than 1 minute. Otherwise, something happens to it and it doesn't work properly. It doesn't develop the proper strength to make curd. And you should always stir it for at least 30 seconds, but very, very gently with the cheesemaker's stir up and down. So after I'm finished stirring this for a minute, I'm going to put the cover back on the pot. I'm going to keep it in the sink, keep it at 90 degrees Fahrenheit for another 90 minutes. And after the next 90 minutes, the fun starts to begin. We should be able to cut some curd. I hope you can see this. I just wanted to show you a close-up of how I cut my curds into those little squares. So now I'm going to let it rest for 5 minutes. All right, the curds have been resting for 5 minutes. Now I'm going to stir them. This is the part of the process which is called cooking the curds. And I'm not actually cooking them on the stove, but I'm keeping the temperature at 90 degrees and I'm going to be stirring them. So that's how they're quote unquote being cooked. Now, when it comes to stirring your curds, you want to stir very, very gently. In the case of, say, a Parmesan cheese, where you want it to be nice and dry, you can stir a little more vigorously, because the more vigorously you stir your curd, the drier the cheese, because it releases more whey. In the case of a Camembert, you don't want it to be dry, you want it to be buttery and creamy. So you stir it so gently. Someone told me once, stir your Camembert curds so gently that it's as though you're trying not to burst bubbles. And I thought that was really a cool way to describe how to do it. And that's what I'm doing now. These curds are going to become very tiny when I'm finished, because I'm going to be stirring them for 15 minutes. And then I'm going to let them sit for 15 minutes. All the while keeping the temperature at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which right now I'm still at. So I will be back when it's time to fill the molds. All right, so my curds have been resting for 15 minutes, and now I'm going to show you how I set up my drainage system. I take a big aluminum bowl and I put it in the sink, and then I take just a plastic cutting board and I take my bamboo mat and I have 2 plastic mats right here. Everything's stable. And then I take my Camembert molds and I put them on top of the plastic mats. Everything's been sterilized and washed, and so make sure everything's really, really clean, because you know you're eating this stuff. I've watched some videos on people making cheese and people canning and preserving and cooking, and I'm kind of appalled sometimes when I see the conditions of, you know, everything that isn't clean. So I just want to show you what I'm going to do. This is my curds and whey. The curds have sunk to the bottom of the pot, which is what I want. And now I'm just going to ladle them into the molds. Okay, well, I moved my pot over to the other side of the sink because I was making a huge mess trying to be camera friendly. So I'm just gonna do what I need to do, and I'm just filling up each mold as evenly as possible with the curd, and it's basically all gonna drain out. And I know that some people are cringing at the moment because I'm not keeping the whey. I really, really know the benefits of whey, but at this point, I haven't figured out a system where I can keep the whey without kind of messing up my drainage system here. I could put a roasting pan underneath maybe to do that, but it fills up so quickly, and then my bowl starts to move around. I've tried doing that before and it hasn't really worked. So I'm going to finish filling these up as evenly as possible, and then I will be right back. Okay, so that took me about 15 minutes to get all of the curds into the molds, because the whey is pretty much still in there and it has to drain before you can add more. So I filled them up pretty high. I'm going to let them drain there for 1 hour, and then for a further 4 hours, every hour, I'm going to flip them, which is going to be interesting, because the first time you flip them, you get a little nervous that everything's going to fall apart, but usually it works out. So I'm just going to cover these, make sure no dust gets into them, and I'm going to leave them there for an hour. And I'm going to put up my cat barricade because they seem to be very attracted to this. It smells a little bit like Kraft dinner cheese, which I don't think is a good thing. But it certainly doesn't taste that way, so I'm happy to say that. And this is real cheese, not cheese food. So I'll be back in about an hour to show you how I flip them. It's been an hour now since I first drained the 2 wheels of Camembert, and I have to let them drain for a further 4 hours, flipping them every hour. After that, they're going to just drain overnight, and I'll finish the process tomorrow before I put them in the ripening box. So instead of keeping the sink busy for the entire night, I decided I'm going to try a different setup. So I have my roasting pan, and I put a plate, and I put another little plastic cutting board. It's a little wobbly, but I think it's going to work. And I do have only 1 extra plastic mat here. These are mesh mats, by the way. I wish I had 2, but I only have 1 extra. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing. I'm taking my bamboo mat and I'm going to put it on top of the plastic tray here. I don't like how unstable that is, but I think it's going to work. And then I'm going to grab my wheel of Camembert very carefully underneath and put the extra mat on top and flip it really quick and hope I don't slip. Hey, I'm a poet and I don't know it. Oh, there it goes. It just dropped. Cool. So that goes there, and I'm going to use this one. Yes, Dana. Yes, Dana, the cheese is not for you. No, it's not for you. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Oh, there we go. Oh, that worked out very well. And then I can use the same bamboo mat to put on top to keep the cats out. And I can clean all that up and I have my sink again. Now, before I stop videotaping for the day, I just want to show you what they look like, because it's kind of cool. They're already starting to take shape. You see? They're not just curds hanging out in the mold anymore. They're starting to take shape. So I'm going to let these drain for 4 more hours, and like I said, I'm going to flip them every hour, and I'll do the last flip at the 5th hour, and then they'll stay that way overnight, and I will continue this video tomorrow morning. Welcome back, everyone. Today is day 2 of the Camembert making process. I woke up at pretty early, actually, about 6:30 this morning, and I flipped the cams 1 more time, and I let them drain for 8 hours, and now the 8 hours is done. So I'm about to take them out of the molds and salt them, and then put them into the ripening box. So here we go. Alright, that looks pretty good. They're solid, but they're still pretty fragile, so you have to be very gentle with them. See, I got some on me. I don't want to tear them at all. So I'm gonna just lift this one and just carefully pick it up. There. They look pretty good. So now I'm gonna salt them. This is cheese salt. I bought this salt at a cheese making supply company online. If you don't have cheese salt or you can't get cheese salt when you're making your cheese, just make sure you don't use iodized salt, like table salt, because the iodization of the salt inhibits the bacterial growth and you won't get the same type of cheese. So coarse salt is usually good. Any kind of sea salt is usually good, but just read the label and make sure it's not iodized. So I have about 2 teaspoons here, and I'm just going to sprinkle all over. And again, I'm going to carefully turn this over. And do the other side. I want to use all my salt here, so I'm going to put a lot on. I salted the bottoms and the tops, but what I neglected to mention was that you are also supposed to salt the sides, because the salt helps the bacteria to form and to grow that bloomy white. So I added a little more salt to my little bowl here, so I'm guessing it's probably about 3 teaspoons that I've used. And I'm just getting the sides. And the cheese wheels are moist enough that the salt is sticking. So I just want to make sure I get everything here. Okay. Now, the cheeses are salted. I'm going to leave them here for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to put them in the ripening box. Well, the cheese has been sitting for 10 minutes, salted, and it's time now to put them in the ripening box. The reality is most people who are home cheesemakers don't have a cheese cave. I don't have a cheese cave. I call my bar fridge the cheese cave. Basically, I learned a trick. If you don't have a cheese cave, you can ripen or age your cheese in, you know, the produce drawers in your fridge. For me, that's a little too cold, and I found that they didn't age very well. So Alex donated his bar fridge. So every time I make cheese, we empty out the bar fridge, and that's where I put my cheese. I bought a little box at the dollar store, just a plastic box. This little clip here is just so when I put the lid on, there's some airflow. Some cheeses need that, some cheeses don't. Camembert doesn't need that, so I don't really need to have this on here. It's going to continue to drain as it ripens for the next 2 weeks. So I put a little bamboo mat, and I've got my clean plastic mats that I'm going to put on top. And then again, gently put the cheeses on top of the mats. Now, most cheeses need to ripen and age at a certain temperature with a certain humidity. In the case of the Camemberts, they need to ripen and age at between 10 to 12 Celsius at 90% humidity. And that's kind of a tall order for a little bar fridge. So in this case, I've wet a piece of paper towel. The temperature is not an issue. I can turn the fridge down so it'll reach about 10 degrees Celsius. But 90% humidity in a fridge, that's looking for mold. So basically, you use a ripening box, you wet a paper towel, and you just stick it in there. Stick the paper towel in there, and you put your lid on. And that should keep it probably not at a 90% humidity, but it's not too bad for home cheese making, and it worked for me the last time. I also have, I bought this at Home Depot. It's a hygrometer. It measures the temperature and the humidity. I think it was like $15 or something like that. So when I have something in the ripening box like this, I try to make room for the hygrometer as well, so I can just keep a quick eye on what's going on. In the bar fridge right now, it's about 9 degrees Celsius. I turned it down a little, so it should reach 10 to 12 in about an hour. With regards to the humidity, though, I'm just relying on this paper towel right here, and hopefully that's going to be enough. And I can just change that paper towel every day, wet it, put it in. As a matter of fact, for the first 14 days, I need to actually, this is going to come in handy right now, I need to keep the lid open for a further 10 minutes right now, just while it's in the ripening box with the salt on it. When 10 minutes is up, I can close it up and stick it in the fridge. I have to check on my cheese every day. When you're cheese making, you have to really have a lot of patience, and you have to really be diligent about checking on the cheese and turning it. In the case of a Camembert, you have to check it every single day, and you have to flip it twice daily while you wipe down any whey that is accumulating on it, and you have to wipe the mats. So twice a day I have to go into that fridge, flip the cheeses, clean the mats, change the paper towel, make sure it's wet, and also leave the lid open for about 5 minutes every time you flip it, because if you keep the lid on, it creates ammonia, and that's going to screw with your cheese making as well. You don't want that ammonia buildup, so you let it air for about 5 minutes every time you flip it, and then you seal it back and put it into the bar fridge. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to ripen for about 10 to 12, maybe 12 to 14 days, just, to be sure. And then as soon as it starts developing that white fuzz, which is called the bloomy white, what I'm going to do is take it out of the ripening box, wrap it in some white plastic cheese paper, which I also got at the cheese making shop online, but I'll do a follow-up video for those things. And then it just stays in the bar fridge at about 10 degrees Celsius for the next 2 months, and hopefully New Year's Eve I'm going to have some nice cams. So I'll just bring this over to the fridge and I'll show you my setup. So here is the cheese cave. That's it. It's a very, very simple setup. Okay, so my little camemberts are ripening in the cheese cave for another couple of weeks. I'm going to do an update video then, and hopefully they'll be nice and fuzzy so you can see what they look like, and they'll be ready to wrap. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to try to do an updated post about equipment that you need and ingredients and companies, because now that I'm about a year and a half into this, I have a little more experience than I did when I first started, and I've realized that there are a lot of pieces of equipment that you don't necessarily need to make cheese, and there are some that are really vital depending on the cheese you want to make. So I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the update video coming up soon. Bye.